Shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? And I give the call to the Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Processing a visa application while somebody is offshore in a third country like Jordan means a person of concern can be stopped before getting to Australia. The last government used this process when bringing people in from Syria. The Prime Minister says the process for granting 2,900 tourist visas to those coming from the terrorist-controlled Gaza zone followed the same process. Can the Prime Minister advise in which third-party country these people were sent to for screening before they came to Australia?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. No matter where a person comes from or what visa they hold, our security agencies are involved in the process. We trust their expertise. We take the same advice from the same security agencies, even the same security personnel as the previous government. In this case, we've rejected more than 7,000 visa applications. Fewer than 1,300 people are here. And I remind the Leader of the Opposition that the Rafah border crossing is controlled by the Israeli and Egyptian authorities. Let's be clear about what is happening here. Israel closed the Rafah border crossing in May. They're not letting people out. 3 months later, the Leader of the Opposition decided to call for a ban on Gazans coming to Australia, even though no one is.
The Prime Minister concluded his answer. Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? Order. Members on my left, when the House comes to order and interjections cease, we'll hear from the member for Solomon.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister update the House on the visit by President-elect Prabowo Subianto? How is the government strengthening our relationship with Indonesia?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Solomon for his question and for his deep interest in the relationship between Australia and Indonesia, which of course is a neighbour to the electorate that the honourable member represents. And today I welcomed Indonesia's President-elect Prabowo Subianto to Australia. Our partnership with Indonesia is profoundly important to Australia. We'll continue to strengthen our ties. Economic partners, security partners and partners in the global transition to net zero. And this morning we announced the conclusion of negotiations on the Australia-Indonesia Defence Cooperation Agreement. Let's be very clear. When the Deputy Prime Minister in coming days travels to Indonesia to sign the agreement, this will represent the most significant defence cooperation agreement between Australia and our largest and most important partner in Southeast Asia. It signals our shared commitment to a peaceful and stable region where sovereignty is respected. This will be a legally binding, treaty-level defence cooperation agreement that deepens bilateral defence cooperation in key areas, including maritime security, humanitarian assistance and disaster response, peacekeeping, counter-terrorism and education and training. It will enable stronger defence cooperation by supporting increased dialogue and strengthening the interoperability of both of our defence forces. It creates a legally binding framework to conduct cooperative defence activities, includes training and exercises, exchanging information and personnel and sharing of scientific and technological data. This is a great day for Australia and Indonesia and our long friendship. And the Deputy Prime Minister hosted the President-elect for lunch. I'll be hosting him for an early dinner this evening. This is an important relationship. We celebrate this year 75 years of diplomatic relations between our two great nations. Indonesia, of course, is on track by 2040 to be one of the largest economies in the world, with a growing middle class, with a real opportunity for Australia to benefit from this relationship. Deepening our links helps both countries to grow our economies, to support jobs and strengthen our supply chains. And our partnership on defence and security helps to promote stability and peace in the region. We'll continue to engage, of course, at the ASEAN Summit later this year, but as well, Indonesia is a partner at the PIF, and this engagement over coming months will be very important indeed for both of our countries.
Indulgence, the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I want to offer our full support to the efforts of the government here and congratulate the Prime Minister on advancing the relationship, and the Deputy Prime Minister as well. I had the great fortune to meet with the now President-elect, then Defence Minister Prabowo in Jakarta a couple of years ago, and his appreciation for Australia, his genuine interest in the relationship and the friendship was obvious during the course of that meeting, but it has been obvious during the course of his career. And I believe very strongly, as the Prime Minister does, that Indonesia and Australia have a shared past, but it is incredibly important for us to ensure that the future is even more emboldened, and the fact that we can work together closely, not just on defence matters, but on national security, otherwise people movements, on drugs and illegal fishing within the region. And Indonesia obviously brings a very significant effort to making sure that with near neighbours we can protect and defend our equities as we go forward. And I welcome any opportunity to work with the Prime Minister and to support the work of the government in what is a very important bilateral agreement and arrangement and friendship between our two countries.
Give the call to the honourable member for Berowra.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Today it was reported that before approving visas for people coming from the terrorist-controlled Gaza war zone, Canada requires applicants to submit to face-to-face interviews and biometric testing in a third country, Egypt. Why didn't the government have a similar arrangement in place before granting more than 2,900 tourist visas?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question, and I note, as I said yesterday, that under the former government, of which he was a member but not a minister, there were over 1,000 visas, tourist visas granted from the former government from people from the occupied Palestinian territories. Now, the Leader of the Opposition's response to that, of course, is that that was before October 7. But the member for Berowra knows full well that Hamas didn't become terrorists on October 7. They have had a terrorist ideology for a long period of time, and indeed have been in charge of Gaza since 2006, when they received less than half of the vote from the people of Gaza in that election, and they haven't had one since, because they are enemies not only of the people of Israel, but also they are enemies of the Palestinian people, because Hamas do not respect the human rights of Palestinian people. After they seized control there, of course, they engaged in violence against their own people in Gaza in order to secure their position. They've continued to do that. They've continued to do that. I did see a report today from Plestia Alikod, who spoke about her own personal journey. And I know that the member for Berowra does respect human rights and people and has a record of it. She went on to say this in her article today. Every person who fled Gaza after October underwent rigorous checks by both Israeli and Egyptian authorities. The idea that those who have successfully passed these screenings and arrived in Australia still pose a threat is unfounded and perpetuates harmful stereotypes, alienating those of us that made it to safety here. The member for Berowra knows, as do other members of this chamber, the danger in stereotyping and targeting people because of their race or their faith. People know that that is certainly not the case, and people from Gaza or the West Bank, for that matter, are certainly not automatically Hamas supporters and shouldn't be seen as being so.
Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? Give the call Order. We'll give the call to the honourable member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government's responsible budget management helping in the fight against inflation? What options were ruled out?
No, the member for Boothby will resume her seat and she'll start her question again. I'm not sure how many times I have to tell the chamber this, but I will do it every single time to call this out. Members know the importance that I place on individual members rising in their places and asking questions, from the Leader of the Opposition to the crossbench to members of the government. To yell out when a member is asking the question is completely disrespectful to the member, but also disrespectful for question time. So the member for Fisher will leave the chamber under 94A. It will apply equally across the chamber. So the member for Boothby will begin her question again.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government's responsible budget management helping in the fight against inflation? What options were ruled out?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. The member for Boothby cares about the cost of living, even if those opposite don't. Mr Speaker, there were no surprises in the minutes which came out today from the meeting of the Reserve Bank Board earlier this month. We are, as a country, making really substantial progress on inflation, but we do need it to moderate further and faster because people are under pressure, and that's something that the government understands as well. Governor Bullock has made it really clear in the last week that the government and the Reserve Bank are aligned when it comes to the fight against inflation. She's also made it clear that we have the same objective here, to get on top of inflation, but we have different responsibilities as we go about it. But the responsibility that we have in common is to get on top of inflation together without smashing the labour market or smashing the economy, which is already soft at a time of substantial global economic uncertainty. Now, because we know that people are doing it tough and because cost of living relief is our highest priority, we're giving every Australian taxpayer a tax cut rolling out right now. We're giving every Australian household energy bill relief rolling out right now as well. And we're making sure that medicines are cheaper, early childhood education is cheaper, that there's rent assistance, and also that people are getting the pay rises that they need to provide for their loved ones at a difficult time. Now, we've deliberately designed that cost of living relief to be meaningful and to be substantial, but also to be responsible, to be delivered in the most responsible way. And that's an important part of our strategy, but it's not the only part of our strategy. We're also turning two big Liberal deficits into two big Labor surpluses, and we're also working through the structural pressures on the budget as well. Now, government spending is not the primary determinant of prices in our economy, but we can help, and we are helping, and surpluses are part of that effort. Now, Mr Speaker, the points that the governor has made in recent weeks, that we're aligned as a government and a central bank, that we have the same objectives but different responsibilities, that public spending isn't the main game, and that our surpluses are helping in the fight against inflation, all of those points absolutely obliterate the dishonesty peddled by those opposite and repeated by people who should know better. Those opposite want higher inflation and they want higher interest rates, so that nobody notices they have no policies and no credibility in the third year of a three-year term, and they won't tell us where $315 billion in cuts are coming from and what that means for Medicare and pensions and the broader economy. Mr Speaker, we are fighting inflation with cost of living help that they don't support, with responsible economic management they know nothing about and can't be bothered asking about, and with a couple of surpluses that they couldn't deliver in almost a decade in office.
Before I call the honourable member for Indi, I am pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is Mr Tim McCurdy, MP, the member for Owens Valley in the Victorian Legislative Assembly, and the Shadow Minister for Water and Shadow Minister for Consumer Affairs, as guests of the member for Nichols. Welcome to question time. The call to the honourable member for Indi.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure and Regional Development. Round 1 of the Growing Regions program opened for applications in July last year. Successful projects weren't announced until May this year. We're now in August and successful applicants are still waiting for their funding so they can get shovels in the ground. Why are regional communities waiting this long for much-needed funding under your government?
Call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much, and can I thank the member for Indi for her question and, of course, her ongoing advocacy for integrity in government. The member for Indi and I both care deeply about regional communities, and I know we share in common our mobile office caravans that we take out into towns big and large. Mine's a 1970s Franklin. I'm not sure what the member for Indi's is, but I don't think it's much younger than that. Can I be very clear?
Order.
When we came to office, we made it very clear that we were wanting to build in better transparency and integrity into our grants program. Of course, as you mentioned, round one of the Growing Regions program, through that we are delivering 40 community infrastructure projects across regional Australia, including the Seymour Community Wellbeing Hub, the Mission Beach Town Upgrade, the Kununurra Runway Extension and, of course, Swan Hill reinvigorating our riverfront project. It includes two projects in the member for Indi's electorate, $1.4 million for the Mansfield Shire Council Lords Around the Ground package and $2.97 million for the Benalla Art Gallery redevelopment. Projects, of course, were carefully selected in accordance with the grant guidelines and underwent a rigorous process designed to enhance integrity and transparency. Clear guidelines that didn't include secret ministerial panels or other factors as a reason to award funding. The process, of course, included a multi-party disciplinary panel, of which you were a member. We are now working closely with state and territory governments to establish a partnership arrangement to deliver the Growing Regions program, as we are now required to do. Under this arrangement, the Australian government will fund state and territory governments to work with approved applicants to prepare and execute a funding agreement and make payments based on agreed milestones. It is normal practice for the Australian government programs to require a funding agreement to be in place with agreed payment milestones before payments are made, as this is a prudent financial management system and helps ensure delivery success. For the first time, of course, all communities, whether they be in our regions or our suburbs, will have access to an open and competitive community infrastructure program. We've done away with what those opposite did, having a community development grants program where no one was able to apply for funding and the coalition simply decided where they were going to actually deliver. Now, I don't make any apologies for cleaning up the mess of what those opposite left. And I'll take that interjection where they say, just let the bureaucrats decide. We know absolutely what happened on that side of the House when it came to community grants, when it came to sports rules, when it came to colour-coded spreadsheets. We are putting integrity back into the grant system and cleaning up, frankly, a mess that was left by all of you.
The House comes to order. I'll hear from the member for Pearce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Resources and Northern Australia. How will the Albanese Labor government's future Made in Australia create jobs in a resilient critical minerals industry to create secure jobs and a strong economy? Are there any threats to the production tax incentive being delivered?
Call to the Minister for Resources and the Minister for Northern Australia.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Pearce for her question. The Albanese Labor government's production tax incentive for critical minerals will support the onshore processing rather than having these commodities shipped overseas for their refining. It will create secure jobs and a resilient economy as we capitalise on the world's soaring demand for critical minerals. It is a significant policy that backs Australia's resources sector. It is one of the biggest resources announcements in a budget in a generation. The resources industry called for the production tax incentive. We worked with them on it and we will deliver it. But there are threats. There are threats to delivery of the production tax credit, Mr Speaker, and they are all sitting over there. The Coalition recently has been speaking on the Future Made in Australia legislation. 29 Liberal and National MPs have spoken so far on that legislation. In a rare outbreak, they've all stuck to the script and all opposed the production tax incentive. They want higher taxes. Those opposite have stood up and turned their back on the resources sector of this country when they had the opportunity, to talk about critical minerals as part of the Future Made in Australia framework. They totally ignored it. Barely any of them spoke about it at all. They spent more time talking about nuclear power and uranium than they spoke about critical minerals and the tax incentives offered to the resources industry. They opposed a costed, responsible, industry-led response to the critical minerals industry's geopolitical challenges, and they call it a welfare for billionaires. Well, they support an absolutely friendless, uncosted, unknown policy to have nuclear power stations right around the country in places the Leader of the Opposition has failed
the Assistant
to
Treasurer
visit.
will cease interjecting.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about. We've talked about the Leader of the Opposition's WA script and his East Coast script, but what about the Leader of the Nationals? I want to know what his WA script is going to be the next time he pops along to visit the new seat of Bull. Well, great. I hear from the Leader of the Nats, he's going to be in Bullwinkle. Well, what is he going to say to the people who will be in Bullwinkle when we know the Leader of the WA Nationals has said it is essential, not just for Western Australia and not just for Australia, but for the Western world to pursue production tax credits. Then there is the Nationals candidate for Bullwinkle. Mia Davies has said downstream incentives are welcome. So this is the Nationals candidate, and the seat of Bullwinkle runs counter to the Leader of the Nationals. Okay, well, I really look forward to that. I doubt you know, Leader of the Nationals, exactly what the mining industry of Western Australia is all about. I've seen a fair bit more than you have, Leader of the Nationals. I can assure you, you reject the resources sector of Western Australia. You fail to understand it. You don't support what they are calling for in the critical minerals production tax incentive.
Call to the honourable member. Order. No, the member for O'Connor will now leave the chamber under 94A. If you're warned, particularly when I'm about to hear from the member for Wannon, that is definitely not a time to interject. Trust me. There are consequences for actions. The member for Wannon has the call.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, of those granted a visa to come to Australia from the terrorist-controlled Gaza war zone, how many have had their visas cancelled since the horrific attack on Israel on October 7 last year?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The member for Wannon uses a couple of incidents in his question. One is to quite rightly speak about October 7. And there's no question that certainly anyone of any decency opposes the atrocity that Hamas committed on October 7. But he also speaks about the terrorist-controlled Gaza Strip. And Hamas did not take control of Gaza on October 7. They took control almost 2 decades ago, and in that time have refused to have any elections or any democratic process or to engage with the people of Gaza, and of course they certainly don't represent either the people of the West Bank. The member knows that we take the same advice from the same security agencies.
Order. The member for Wannon on a point of order.
Yeah, thanks. It's relevant, Speaker. The question was very tight, very specific. It was, how many have had their visas cancelled since the horrific attack in Israel? So, very, very specific question. It was.
The member for Wannon. Order. Minister for the Environment. It's not helping. The Leader of the House.
To the point of order, Mr Speaker, it's yet another example of them getting up on a point of order on relevance and only quoting a portion of the question that they asked. And the relevance rule allows any part of the question.
Yeah.
If the Prime Minister is being relevant to any part of the question.
Member for Wannon can just. The way we'll do this is When someone is on their point on either side, there's no point getting up until this person has concluded. If you wish to further debate the point of order, that's okay. But this collision at the dispatch box has got to stop. So the Prime Minister has been dealing with sections of the question regarding October 7 and the Gaza control. He was talking about the process of the visas, so I'm just going to make sure that his answer, I can appreciate the member would like a number or a figure, but as I've said many, many times, I can't compel the Prime Minister to give that figure as much as the member may wish that. He just needs to remain directly relevant, so he can't go off on topic. He's got to remain directly relevant to this question, and I'm listening carefully. He was talking about visas being issued, so I want to make sure that it is relative to the question. He has the call.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Last Wednesday, the Leader of the Opposition said, "I don't think people should be coming in from that war zone at all. At the moment, it's not prudent to do so, and I think it puts our national security at risk." That's what he said last Wednesday in welcoming Olympians home. The fact is that came 3 months after there was a shutting of the Rafah border crossing, which occurred in May.
Give a call to the honourable member for Paterson.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. How will the Albanese Labor government's future Made in Australia benefit regional Australia, and what challenges stand in the way?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and could I, of course, thank the member for Paterson for her question, another great champion of the regions who's doing a great job advocating for her community. I know she would have been very excited yesterday to see the girders going up on the M1 Raymond Terrace, a project that we're currently building in her electorate. We understand that people are under pressure and that some people are doing it really tough. The Australian government's number one priority is delivering cost of living relief through tax cuts, energy bill relief and, of course, pay rises. But at the same time, as we are helping people earn more and keep more of what they earn, we are setting up for the jobs of the future, and particularly the jobs of the future in our regions, through our Future Made in Australia. It's an economic plan for a better future for our regions, making Australia wealthier, more secure and more independent. More than anywhere in the world, Australia has the opportunity to create those new jobs, those new industries and those new skills. But we of course need a government that is willing to step up, to partner with the private sector to build a stronger economy and a future made right here in this country. And that is exactly what we're going to do through the development of a low-carbon liquid fuel industry here in Australia, helping hard-to-abate sectors like aviation and heavy haulage to reduce their emissions while creating new jobs and opportunities across the country, particularly in our regions. From growers to refineries, this policy will create new income streams and job opportunities across regional Australia. Right now, as I've said before, much of our feedstock, including 60% of our canola, is exported to Europe for the use in biofuels that then, of course, we have to buy back. We should not be doing that. We should be actually processing and keeping those jobs here in this country. We know this is a policy that is supported by industry. GrainCorp has said the federal budget funding for low-carbon fuels initiatives is playing into its strategy of becoming a major player in the renewable fuels supply chain. We know Bioenergy Australia has said it will create jobs in regional Australia, boost economic growth, bolster economic energy security and, of course, future-proof our tourism and our transport sectors. And we know this policy is supported by our farmers as well. I know the member for Gippsland is very supportive of that as well. The National Farmers Federation said the NFF has long supported the development of the Australian bioenergy and low-carbon liquid fuel industries here in Australia, with Australian agriculture playing an important role in the supply chain. But we know those opposite are not not supporting this policy. You know, you have to say, what have you got against regional jobs? Why do you not want to see low-carbon liquid fuels and the jobs for our farmers, our jobs for people in refineries and processors across the country? What have you got against the regions?
Order. When the House comes to order, hear from the member for Wannon.
Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, how many of the 2,900 visas from Gaza have been cancelled?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question. I refer him to my previous answers. We have rejected more than 7,000 visa applications. Fewer than 1,300 people are here. I remind the member that the Rafah border crossing is controlled by the Israeli and Egyptian authorities, and it was closed in May. They're not letting people out, and they could have asked a question about cost of living, could have asked a question about
Order. Prime
about
Minister,
the visit of the President-elect of Indonesia.
Prime Minister will pause. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, on relevance and following your earlier advice, that is as tight as that question could possibly be, and yet the Prime Minister still refuses to give a straight answer.
Resume your answer. Resume your.
I have a question.
Yep. Yeah. Talking about the opposition is not being relevant to the question unless it's in a compare and contrast. So the Prime Minister, if he's concluded his answer, will move to the next question. Order. Oh, order. No. There's no need for commentary. Give the call to the honourable member for Fraser.
My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. What are the difficulties the Albanese Labor government has faced in the defence portfolio, and what difficult decisions are being made as a result?
Give the call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Today, the Albanese government has concluded negotiations for a historic defence cooperation agreement with Indonesia. In February, our government announced a complete restructure of our Navy, which saw the first of a new class of surface combatants enter into our fleet this decade. Last year, we restructured the Army. Next year, we will see the beginnings of the manufacture of guided weapons in Australia. The Defence Strategic Review has completely reassessed our strategic circumstances and has reshaped our Defence Force, and most importantly, these decisions have been funded by record increases in defence spending over the forward estimates and over the decade. And, Mr Speaker, all of this has happened in just 2 years. The contrast between the actions of the Albanese government and the vaudeville and hoopla which we saw from those opposite could not be more stark. Now, the Shadow Minister for Defence has said that he wants to see—
Order. No, members on my right. The member for Blair. Order. Members on my right will cease rejecting. The member for Canning is entitled, just like any other member is entitled, to raise a point of order. The member for Canning has the call.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Speaker. It was on relevance. There was no alternative approaches mentioned in the question, and Happy Gilmore here has just gone nuts with
No, resume your seat. Resume your seat. That remark is not necessary to make. A reflection on a member is not appropriate. We are not having question time where people put digs into each other unnecessarily. Order. We're just going to hear from the Leader of the House.
Thanks, Speaker. Just on the issue of relevance, the question went specifically at the start to the difficulties that are being faced in the defence portfolio, and those difficulties are the Minister is clearly drawing to the legacy we inherited. It makes it completely relevant.
The Minister is entitled to talk about the difficulties, but he simply can't have the remainder of his answer regarding criticism in order to make it relevant to government policy, which I'm sure he will do. The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
The Shadow Minister of Defence has said he wants to see a dramatic increase in defence capability by 2026, but he cannot even secure agreement within his own ranks to support Labor's increase in defence spending. And what makes it worse is that those opposite, when they were in government, chronically underfunded defence. An underfunding of defence which under them would not have seen new amphibious craft for our army until the 2030s, or a new surface combatant for our Navy until 2034, or the manufacture of guided weapons until 2035. And what made it even worse was that they were completely incapable of making a difficult decision. I mean, they were elected in 2013. Having changed their mind twice, it was not until 2021 that they settled on the successor submarine to the Collins class, and even then they were saved by the fact that they were thrown out of government 7 months later before they could change their mind again. And underwriting it all was a complete incompetence that was led by their last Defence Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, incompetence which saw 7 different Defence Ministers during the course of 9 years, incompetence which saw 28 different defence projects running a combined 97 years over time. Well, Mr Speaker, that has all changed because in the last 2 years the Albanese government has been making the decision to do what it takes to rebuild our defence force and to keep Australians safe.
Order. Hear from the member for Wannon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How many of the 2,900 visas from Gaza have been cancelled?
Give a call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for his question. We've been guided every single step of the way by our security agencies. Anyone who's been given a visa has passed the same security standard. And what our agencies do, and the member might know this, I suspect, is constantly examine issues. That doesn't stop when someone is granted a visa. That's right. Our security agencies continue to do their job. This is an ongoing process. That is what they do, regardless of where people are coming from and the circumstances. Their priority is security.
Order. The Prime Minister has concluded his answer. The member for Spence has the call.
My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. How will Australian families benefit from the Albanese Labor government's investments into the early childhood education and care workforce? Are there other approaches to early childhood education the government has rejected?
Great question.
The call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education and the Minister for Defence.
Mr Speaker, and I do thank the member for Spence for his question, and I want to also show my appreciation for his ongoing advocacy to help families access early childhood education and care in the electorate of Spence. Now, Mr Speaker, the Albanese government is focused on delivering cost of living relief for Australian families, even though those opposite might not be. We've already made early childhood education and care more affordable for over 1 million families right across Australia. The ACCC review has told us that that has decreased out-of-pocket costs on average by around 11% for families. And work is underway for us to deliver our vision for a universal early learning system that is affordable, that is accessible and that is inclusive. And we know we can't do that without a strong and stable early childhood workforce. And that's why, Mr Speaker, earlier this month the Prime Minister announced an historic 15% pay rise for early childhood workers. Now, what this means, this pay rise means, is that by the end of this year, 200,000 early childhood workers across Australia will get at least an extra $100 in their pay packet. And by the end of next year, that'll be at least $150 a week in their pay packet. Now, Dr Ros Baxter, the CEO of Good Start, said this. She said that with this $3.6 billion commitment, the Prime Minister has demonstrated he is serious about delivering a truly universal early education system for all Australia's children and families, because the first thing a universal system needs is a strong workforce. And indeed, we agree with Dr Baxter. And that's why we're taking action to retain workers into the sector and attract workers back into the sector, because we know that early educators shape lives and they change lives. But, Mr Speaker, we're not only supporting early childhood educators, we're supporting families as well. To be eligible to receive this funding for the wage rise, early childhood education services won't be able to increase their fees by more than 4.4% for the next 12 months. And that important condition is putting downward pressure on fees for families. Now, Mr Speaker, this stands in stark contrast to those opposite. They want to make this all about outdated ideas of modern Australia, a version of Australia straight out of the pages of a 1940s Women's Home Journal. Well, Mr Speaker, Australia has moved on, and so should they. They should get behind this increase for wages for early childhood educators. They should get behind a modern Australia where a feminised workforce is valued and where early childhood educators are valued and recognised for the important work that they do.
The call to the honourable member for Ryan.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. Today on the ABC, one of the pioneers of online sports betting, Stuart Kenny, said in relation to gambling advertisements, if you want to protect the children, you go ahead with a total ban. If you want to protect bookmakers' profits, you go ahead with a partial ban. Minister, who do you want to protect?
Give the call to the Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question and the imputations in it. Let me make it very clear, Mr Speaker, that it's taken a Labor government to not only embark on the most thorough review of an area in need, overdue need for reform, than any other government. It is also a Labor government that is standing up to a number of very well-resourced vested interests who do not want change. This is a government that is being consultative, evidence-based and committed to three things. Firstly, to ensure that we break the normalisation between gambling and sport. Secondly, that we protect children. Thirdly, that we focus on the saturation of ads and the fact that they are targeted at one of the most vulnerable cohorts in Australia, namely young men aged 18 to 35. We're doing that, Mr Speaker, in an orderly, consultative manner. We are doing this in a way that is evidence-based, and the member, I am happy to stand corrected, has never sought a briefing on this matter directly with me, but my door is always open.
Order. Order. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the member for Swan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government getting on with the job of delivering cheaper, cleaner power, backed up by batteries? And what other approaches to energy has the government rejected?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member not only for the question but also her contribution in this parliament as an engineer from Kalgoorlie with a passion for climate action, Mr Speaker. Now, Mr Speaker, the honourable member asked me about progress in introducing cheaper renewable energy, and of course we're pleased that it's up 25% since we came to office, Mr Speaker. But of course our policy is also renewable energy backed by batteries, backed by gas and backed by transmission, Mr Speaker. And I'm also pleased to inform the honourable member and the House that household batteries are up 21% in the last 12 months, Mr Speaker, that this government is delivering 420 community batteries across Australia, And in the first 7 months of this year, we've had 2.8 gigawatts worth of big battery start construction, which is part of a pipeline of 9 gigawatts. And the honourable member and other Western Australian members will be interested to know that 2 of those big batteries are in a place called Collie in Western Australia, Mr Speaker. That will be open next year. We have the Synergy battery in Collie, which at 2,000 megawatt-hours is one of the largest batteries in the world, and the Neoen battery, Mr Speaker, which will have the capacity to charge and discharge 20% of the needs of the southwest grid in Western Australia, Mr Speaker. 2 big batteries under construction in Western Australia open next year. Now, all this will come as a considerable surprise to the Leader of the Opposition, I'm sure, for 2 reasons, Mr Speaker. He's never been to Collie, and he doesn't know where it is, Mr Speaker, and also he doesn't know that batteries exist. He said in an interview earlier this year, just in March this year, hopefully the battery technology is about to be discovered. Now, Mr Speaker, it was actually discovered in 1800, but the Leader of the Opposition, I'm sure, will catch up. Now, when the Leader of the Opposition eventually gets to Collie, he will have some explaining to do, Mr Speaker, not least of which, when will Collie get their nuclear reactor? Now, to be fair to the member for Fairfax, he's been to Collie, and he was asked, when are we getting our nuclear reactor? And he said, our plan, we talked about it with Collie Council today, is that we would see the first electricity coming to the grid in a 10-year period from small modular reactors. So 10 years, one of the first ones in Collie. The Western Australian Senator, Senator Michaelia Cash, was asked the same question, and she said, so we're likely to be part of the second tranche, which is in the lead-up to 2050. Now, which is it to be, Mr Speaker, the first 10 years or this new policy of a second tranche, which is in the lead-up to 2050? They don't know where Collie is, and they can't say when they're getting their nuclear reactor. Now, this is important, Mr Speaker. The Mudgee Power Station in Collie is closing in 2 tranches this year and in 2029. 2029. Where is the power and the jobs going to come from between 2029 and 2050? Where are they coming from under the Leader of the Opposition's crazy plan? They do not have a plan. All they've got is a fantasy.
Has concluded. We'll hear from the member for Wannon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, how many of the 2,900 visas of people onshore from Gaza have been cancelled?
Order. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question, but the whole premise of it is wrong. There aren't 2,900 people onshore. And I've said that. If he'd followed that, he would have known, including in earlier questions today. But I am asked about visitor visas, and I can tell because of the financial year issue. Visitor visas for Ukrainians was 9,027 between 20th to 4th of February 2022 and 30th of June 2022.
Order. Prime Minister will pause. The member for Wannon on a point of order.
Yeah, it's relevant, Speaker. Of those who are here onshore, of those 2,900, that's what I asked, how many have had their visas cancelled? That is what I asked. How many?
Order. It's not another opportunity. Order. The member for Wannon is entitled to order. Members on my right will cease laughing. Member for Wannon is entitled to raise a point of order. Prime Minister's answer has got to be directly relevant to the question he was asked. Order. And I asked him. Order. And I ask him to return to the question.
Less than half of the figure that he used of 2,900. Therefore, the whole premise of the question is simply wrong. Visitor visas from Syrians, Afghans and Iraqis, of course, that have also been subject to conflict and control. I mean, Afghanistan's controlled by the Taliban. Syria has been a civil war, with parts of it controlled by ISIS, and of course Iraq as well. Those figures from the 2013-14 financial year to 2022 of visitor visas are 1,991 from Afghanistan, 4,994 people from Iraq, 1,505 from Syria, all granted visitor visas by the former government, all in circumstances where Islamic State was in control of large parts of Iraq and Syria from 2014 to 2019. Syria's been in a civil war since 2012, and the Taliban have been in control of large parts of Afghanistan for that entire period.
Call to the honourable member for order. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme. How are the Albanese Labor government's reforms to the NDIS ensuring that the scheme is restored to its original intent and participants are put back at the centre of the scheme?
Call to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the Minister for Government Services.
I'd like to thank the saxophone-playing, Indonesian-speaking emergency doctor from Wyong, the member for Reid, for his very good question. And even though it was his birthday last Friday, he understands that the NDIS is changing lives for the better. We are returning the scheme to its true purpose.
Order. Members on my left.
We are making sure that support gets through to the people for whom it was designed and that it's sustainable for future generations. And the legislation is currently in the final stages of consideration by the Senate, and I do acknowledge the constructive engagement with the opposition. And if this legislation is passed, it's a significant step towards a stronger NDIS. The legislation does a few simple things. It'll stop the automatic top-up of participants' plans, which are exhausted early. It'll create the architecture to implement the NDIS review's recommendations to put a total cap flexible budget in place for all of the participants. And it'll exclude supports supposed to be funded by other service systems, or indeed supports which were never intended to be funded by the NDIS. If we're able to pass it this week, the necessary legislative framework to improve the participant experience and deliver fairer decisions which will be more transparent and more consistent. It allows us to get on with the work designing the finer practical elements of NDIS reform with participants, with the people who love them, the people who work with them and their advocates. Now, there are a number of amendments in the Senate contributed by the disability community, and we will continue to listen to stakeholders, including the states, people with disability, the opposition, and, of course, people, their representatives. This has been a huge body of consultation. The review which we set up, which we promised during an election, talked to 10,000 people. It took 4,000 submissions, literally 2,000 hours. I've personally attended 18 town hall meetings where I've heard from over 10,000 attendees. And indeed, the first of the Senate inquiries went for 12 weeks and had 200 stakeholders. This is very thorough. What I hope we can tell Australians who support this scheme by the end of this week is we've got the foundation of a new budget-setting process. We're also clamping down on fraud. We've got clarity about what you can spend. And we've also got the registration task force to make sure that we register providers so that we know who's actually providing the services. And I commend the legislation when it comes back here, hopefully Thursday.
The call to the member for Kennedy.
Treasurer, doesn't federal government backing of Brisbane's Olympics confiscate $30 billion off North and Central Queensland's coal and copper miners, cane and cattle farmers, giving it to the IOC, whose Paris opening ceremony was, I quote, an orgiastic pagan ritual denigrating Christianity? Treasurer, didn't Christians abolish slavery, create from a brutal imperium, Pax Romana, from the Dark Ages, the Renaissance? Didn't communism murder 78 million people? Didn't Christian Gorbachev, the Pope, and Charlie Wilson's Christians abolish communism? Didn't pagan rituals sacrifice children to the tree and crocodile gods? Do such rituals still live on, Mr. Treasurer?
Order. The member for Kennedy has asked his question. He'll resume his seat. There are a number of elements of that question that I don't think went to the Treasurer's responsibilities, particularly the... No, I heard every word. I heard every word. Absolutely heard every word. Order. The Treasurer has the call.
That's what he said.
Order. Members on my left and right.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank my fellow Queenslander for the characteristically colourful question. I think the House will forgive me for steering well clear of the pagan rituals and the tree gods, and I will spare the House. I'll spare the House a gallop through a couple of thousand years of human history, and I want to focus on two things, two important parts of the member for Kennedy's question, one that I agree with and one that I respectfully disagree with. Where we agree and where we have an affinity is really the quite immense contribution that the workers and industries and employers of regional Queensland make to our national economy. That's one of the reasons why I'm so proud that 71,000 workers in the member for Kennedy's electorate will be getting a tax cut. 83,000 households will be getting energy bill relief in addition to the Queensland Energy Bill Relief Scheme as well. It's why I'm so proud of the investments we're making in the Flinders Highway, the Bruce Highway, and it's why a future made in Australia envisages an absolutely central role for places like the Northwest Minerals Province.
No. Yeah. Order. No. Order. Just going to deal with this. Order. Members on my right and left, every member is entitled to ask the question of their choice. The majority of that question was not within the Treasurer's responsibilities. Order. He was asked about the $30 billion funding, right, regarding a significant infrastructure project. So the Treasurer is being directly relevant regarding that part of the question. Here's the call.
Yeah, Mr Speaker, it's certainly more coherent than anything the Shadow Treasurer has said in recent times, Mr Speaker. Now, the reason I'm acknowledging, indeed celebrating, the big contribution that the Northwest Minerals Province and regional Queensland, central, north and far north Queensland make to our national economy is because I do recognise, and I know the Prime Minister recognises as well, that when we make decisions about roads funding or investment in industry or in the Olympics, that regional Queensland and regional Australia is always foremost in our minds, because we know that if we want the national economy to be strong, then the regional economies of this country need to be a bigger part of the story. Now, when it comes to the Olympics, Mr Speaker, this is where the member for Kennedy and I respectfully disagree, because I think the Olympics are going to be amazing in South East Queensland. And one of the reasons why I think that the Olympics will be amazing is because it will be good not just for South East Queensland but for the whole country. And in a way that the opposition leader does not understand, the Olympics that we've just seen in Paris were a unifying moment for this country. No matter how much people might try and divide and diminish us, I believe that the Olympics have the capacity to bring people together, and I think that will be especially the case when it comes to the Brisbane Olympics. I know the Sports Minister and the Infrastructure Minister have the same optimism and the same belief. And so we're not investing $30 billion, as the member for Kennedy said in his question, but about $3.5 billion in 20 venues right around South East Queensland. That will create jobs and opportunities right around Australia, not just in South East Queensland, and that's why I'm such an enthusiastic supporter of the Olympics in Brisbane in 32.
Oh, no. The member for Kennedy doesn't get to... There are other forms of the House where the member for Kennedy may raise his concerns. We'll hear from the honourable member for Cunningham.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Special Minister of State. Why is it important to have rigorous, transparent and fair election processes? And is the Minister aware of any examples of groups seeking special treatment outside the rules?
The call to the Minister representing the Special Minister of State.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Cunningham for that question. Of course, Speaker, Australia's electoral system is the envy of the world. The Australian Electoral Commission continues to deliver elections in an independent, robust and transparent way. The AEC is in charge of nominations and managing the electoral roll, the selection of polling places and the appointment of polling officials. And these are rightly free from interference by political parties seeking to game the system for their benefits, and are essential to maintain the confidence in the results of our elections. Now, just like other electoral commissions, the New South Wales Electoral Commission is currently conducting local government elections. These include...
Order.
These include...
The Minister will pause and just cool it for a moment, and we'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Mr Speaker, the New South Wales Electoral Commission is not within the responsibilities of this minister. The question and the answer are out of order. The minister should be sat down.
Order. The ministers on my right here will cease interjecting. The Minister for the Environment will cease interjecting, so I can hear from the Leader of the House.
Thanks, Speaker. To the point of order, the final part of the question said this. Is the minister aware of any examples of groups seeking special treatment outside the rules? And I reckon she has one.
Order. Order. Members on my right, Minister will just pause. The Manager on the point of order.
Mr Speaker, what the Leader of the House has just said is no answer to the fundamental proposition that the New South Wales Electoral Commission is not within the responsibilities of this minister. The question and the answer are out of order.
The question is within order. If there was a problem with the question, the time to do that was to probably at the beginning of the question. So, order. The Minister for Industry and Science is not helping the situation. So, given the minister has outlined the responsibility of the Electoral Commission, she was asked about any other groups about the rules of electoral cycles. So I'm going to listen to what she says, but she's got to remain directly relevant. She won't be able to focus on the entire part of that, but I'm sure we'll all listen carefully to her examples. The Minister has the call.
Well, of course, the AEC, along with all electoral commissions in this country, deserve to be able to go about their business independently. And of course that includes setting deadlines and for all parties to adhere to those deadlines. And these are not surprising deadlines. Of course, I found in 2021 the New South Wales Office of Local Government published a guide clearly stating that the ordinary local government elections in New South Wales would be held in September 2024. Now, unfortunately, due to the chaos and incompetence of the New South Wales Liberal Party, they were the only ones not to be able to get their nominations in. But I am asked about any group seeking special treatment outside the electoral rules. And yes, it might come as a surprise to the House that the Liberal Party are now blaming the independent umpire, threatening legal action against the New South Wales Electoral Commissioner for their incompetence. Of course, this makes a mockery of our independent processes and our democracy. Now, I'm sure that the New South Wales Liberal Party is a little disappointed that Scott Morrison is no longer Prime Minister, because, of course, he could have secretly appointed himself as the New South Wales Electoral Commission and overturned the decision. Of course, they don't always have trouble with their paperwork. I'm sure if the local government association forms look more like visas for French au pairs, they would have got it in on time. But anyone looking at this chaos would have been surprised to see the Liberal Party also miss the deadline for the Logies for the best comedy entertainment, because this has been a comedy of errors. Instead of blaming the independent umpire, the Liberal Party should abide by the rules, admit their chaos and not risk our democracy.
Order. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the member for Wannon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How many of the 2,900 visas from Gaza have been cancelled?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Speaker, as I've said before, Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for his question. We've been guided every step of the way by our security agencies. What our agencies do is to constantly examine issues. That doesn't stop when someone is granted a visa.
Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? The order. The Leader of Opposition on a point of order.
Thank you very much.
The order. The member for Hume and the Prime Minister will cease objecting so I can hear from the order. Order. The Treasurer will cease interjecting so I can hear from the Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I seek your ruling on whether the Prime Minister is relevant to the question he was asked.
Order. The Leader of the House on a point of order.
I'm presuming he's raised a point of order on relevance. It was phrased as though it was a question at the end of question time. But speak to the point of order. The standing orders provide that the answer be relevant to the question. The terms of the question went to those visas, went to the concept of cancellation, and so for the Prime Minister to be talking about those visas, to be talking about the processes that we use with our security agencies, is clearly relevant to the terms in which it was asked.
Order. Order. No. The member for Barker and the Attorney-General. Just going to bring. We'll deal with this in an orderly and respectful way. On further to the point of order.
The question didn't go to the concept of, as the Minister for Immigration says. It was very clear how many of the 2,900 visas from Gaza have been cancelled. There's no concepts of. It's just a question how many.
Yeah. Yeah. I can appreciate the member for Wannon, as I've said in my earlier remarks, would like a number, would like a figure, would like that. Okay, and that's the question that you've asked. Within that question, obviously, the Prime Minister, I can't make the Prime Minister give the member the number, just as I can't ask any minister to answer a yes/no question. So the Prime Minister has to be directly relevant, has to talk about this set of visas or how the visas were issued or why the visas were issued to be directly relevant. So if the Prime Minister strays off into another topic or another area, he won't be directly relevant, and I'll bring him to order. The Prime Minister has the call.
Speaker, I'm speaking about the process that happens with the granting of these visas, and that is what I am asked about. And from a group of people who held press conferences and used to say they wouldn't discuss anything at all about whether there were any visas at all, because this whole area was because of security issues like on-water matters, it is unbelievable that they expect that the
Prime Minister returned the question.
They will get answers on details. Now, when it comes to the granting of a visa, they're granted in the same way our security agencies are involved, the same security standard.
The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister is talking about the visas being issued. I'm just going to make sure he's being directly relevant to the question.
I'm being, and I am, Mr. Speaker, and that doesn't stop when someone is granted a visa. Our security agencies continue to do their job.
Order.
That is what they do. Now, I haven't been speaking about other things. If I was asked about cost of living, or if I was asked about anything that they seemingly don't care about, but all they care about is going down this negative road, because we know who this bloke is. He shows us from the time he walked into this place and from the time he walked out.
The Prime Minister will pause. Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? Member for Holt has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. why is cost of living relief the #1 priority of the Albanese government? How does it compare to other approaches?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. It's a real honour to serve with the member for Holt, who's an absolute champion for her local communities and her local people. Mr Speaker, you wouldn't know it from those opposite, but the #1 pressure that people feel right now is cost of living pressure. And that's why it's our #1 focus as a government, from the Prime Minister right through our government, Mr Speaker. We know that people are doing it tough, and that's why we are providing a tax cut for every taxpayer, energy bill relief for every household, help with medicines and early childhood education and rent, and boosting pay at the same time. But all we get from those opposite, Mr Speaker, is another day doubling down on divisiveness and diversion, another day of scaremongering from the Leader of the Opposition, and another day of silence from the Shadow Treasurer on the economy. I was thinking a moment ago when Minister Rishworth was talking about Prime Minister Morrison swearing himself into multiple portfolios. The former government had 2 Treasury spokespeople. This opposition has none. Mr Speaker, it has none. So it averages out. It averages out 1 each, Mr Speaker, either side of the election. One of them's on the dog whistle, the other one's in the doghouse, Mr Speaker. And whenever he plays his little dog whistle, the Shadow Treasurer rolls over. Every time he plays his dog whistle, Mr Speaker, he sits there voiceless and clueless on the most important issue that people can face right now. Mr Speaker, today in question time, every single question on the Middle East, not one single question on Middle Australia. Not one question about Middle Australia.
Order. There is far too much noise. The member for Paterson has warned. The Deputy Leader on a point of order.
Speaker, you have ruled several times on imputations about other members, language used in descriptions of character. I seek your ruling about whether the Treasurer is in order with that answer.
Look, I'm just going to ask the Treasurer to temper his language, to return to the question and get through this answer. The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. They're playing politics on national security because they are hopeless on economics. That's the truth of it.
No, I want to hear from the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I move the member be no longer heard.
Order. Members on my right. No. Members on my right will cease interjecting. Order. No. The members on my right, the Assistant Treasurer will remove whatever he was holding up. The question before the House is the member no longer be heard. Order. We'll deal with this in silence. The question before the House is that the member no longer be heard. Those opinions say aye. Against no. The noes have it. The ayes have it. It's division. Yep, division required. Ring the bells for 4 minutes. Lock the doors. The question before the House is the member no longer be heard. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair and the noes to the left. I appoint the honourable members for Parkes and Gray as tellers for the ayes and the honourable members for Werriwa and Bean as tellers for the noes. Order. The result of the division is ayes 53, noes 92. The matter was resolved in the negative. Members can resume their seats as quickly and as quietly as possible. And I give the call to the Treasurer in continuation.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. That break was actually useful. It was a good opportunity to clean up the little shards of the opposition leader's glass jaw over there, Mr Speaker. Another display of extreme weakness and extreme silkiness from the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker. Now, the point that I was making, Mr Speaker, before I was so rudely interrupted, is that we are providing cost of living relief that they don't support. We are delivering surpluses that they couldn't deliver in 9 attempts. And we're providing responsible economic management that they can't even be bothered asking about in the question time of the People's House of the National Parliament, Mr Speaker. Now, they stir chaos and conflict because they have no costed policies, they have no economic credibility, and they won't tell the Australian people why they don't support cost of living relief, but they do have $315 billion in secret cuts, and they need to tell us what does that mean for Medicare, what does it mean for pensions, and what does it mean for the economy.
Call to the Prime Minister.
Well, when he sits down.
The member for Wannon will resume the seat. Order. Members on my right, the Prime Minister has the call.
Having just wasted time with that previous motion by the Leader of the Opposition, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.